Good morning, everybody, for the final day of Fest 1. It's going to be a great General Assembly this morning. We've got Fareed Zakaria, the 2025 guest curator, in conversation with Alberto Gonzalez and Sally Yates, two former attorney generals. And as we reflect on the end of Fest 1, which doesn't happen until 5 o'clock today, so we have a ton to pack in, I can hear the Roaring Fork River behind me. And I think about what Walter Isaacson was reflecting with his conversation of Steve Jobs of what we're going to be putting back into the river. So our purpose here is to have all of you leave this campus more inspired, to have a greater impact on your communities and the world. And so as you run through the finish line of Fest 1, think about what you're going to bring back to your communities, what you're going to be putting back in the river. And as you're walking from one side of campus and you hear the Roaring Fork, reflect on that, because we want your experience here not to be about just 1 week at the end of June, but about the year-long journey. And we want you to be part of this journey next year. Our dates for 2026 are going to mirror 2025, so June 25th to July 1st, 2026. We actually opened our registration earlier than ever, so you can go into the registration tent and hold your passes for next year, because we will sell out again. We've got great momentum. We're so thrilled. So some of you may have seen the second planting of C.J. Henry's flowers. It is Black-Eyed Susans today. C.J. had a great panel. So we had Columbine yesterday, and we have Black-Eyed Susans today. Tomorrow will be Indian paintbrush. You're meant to pick them. I saw somebody who said, I've got so many nieces and nephews. They had a whole bouquet. I said, that's wonderful. And you're not only bringing back that great tribute to Elizabeth Pepka, but unless you fully deflate it, you're bringing back that mountain air that helps us all get together. Also, in terms of you guys having experienced this firsthand, you can share the content that are on these stages with friends and family, and we post the content online. And the easiest way to navigate that is in the app. You can see that as soon as the video is ready, there's a video thing that pops up and you can watch it. You can also go to aspenideas.org, or you can go to the Aspen Institute's YouTube pages. So that's something I'd encourage you to do, because you can't be everywhere at once. And so if you saw one session, you said, I loved that, but I want to see something else. We not only have that video available, but then every week with our new deal with PRX, we're going to be distributing our Aspen Ideas to Go podcast. Somebody asked me yesterday, are you so excited you're halfway through? I said, no, I wish we were just starting again. And they're like, are you hanging in there? I'm like, if hanging means going on the monkey bars and having a blast with all of you. So I just want to say that it's been a true privilege for the entire Aspen Ideas Festival to host you. And when we talk about the 75-year history and we talk about the 21 years of the Aspen Ideas Festival, you are now a part of it. So if this is your first festival, or if this is your 21st festival, we're so happy to have had this shared experience with you. And we know that we can get better. We're all about learning together, continuous improvement. And so you'll get a post-festival survey. But there's also a third-party researcher that is walking around. But I'll put up, there's a QR code that if you want to go deeper and have a one-on-one, you're welcome. You're encouraged to. It's warranted. We want to be better. We know we can be better, and we can learn with you. So we're so grateful for that feedback. So when you get the email, click on it, give us your feedback. We have an amazing General Assembly today. I mentioned it. Fareed's going to be moderating. We've got leaders in all different disciplines here. And I just think about the fact that we'll still have the session that starts at 11 o'clock. We've got the afternoon of conversation, which is going to be kicking off at 3 p.m. Doors open at 2 today. We are doing heightened screening, so if you didn't bring your laptop or large electronic device, great. If you did, you're just going to have to put it on a table as you walk in. But we're just trying to keep everyone safe and secure. It's going to be a dynamite dialogue. We've got, starting off, Jeff Koons and Melissa Chu, and then we've got that followed by Zanny Mitten Bedos, Fareed Zakaria and Tom Friedman. And then we've got Coach Kerr in conversation with Wes Moore, moderated by CBS's John Dickerson. So without further ado, as we think about the core values of the Institute, leadership is always a through line. And so as we continue to celebrate the 75 years of this place, we're going to look at the different leaders that have come across our stages and then get into the dialogue of our General Assembly. Thank you so much for being here.
The Aspen Ideas Festival has always been a place where meaningful conversations about the state of humanity, the future of everything, and the lessons of history happen. A place where difficult questions are asked and answered, hard truths are revealed and examined, or new discoveries are presented with excitement and hope. The ideas are important, but the people that participate make the conversations about more than what happens on a stage in Aspen. Which is why it has always been important for the Ideas Festival to bring world leaders in every industry and field of expertise onto these Aspen stages. Whether it's heads of state, titans of industry, or leaders in government, science, healthcare, economics, entertainment, and more. The individuals who make decisions of consequence that affect our daily lives come to Aspen each and every summer to enlighten us on both the things that we know and the things that we don't. The Aspen Ideas Festival is a place where we can join these leaders in dialogue on stage or on a walk across campus. It's a place where they can listen to and learn from the academics, innovators, leaders, thinkers, and every one of you that comprise this Aspen Ideas community. And we all take home the lessons we learned from one another over a week on this beautiful Aspen campus.
Welcome, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be able to do this opening panel with such distinguished guests. They would technically require that I call them General Yates and General Gonzalez. I think that sounds a little strange, so if you don't mind, I'm going to say Alberto and Sally. Also, just so you know, we're taping this for my show. I want to make sure audio, everything is all right. And if anyone has some loud heckling they want to do it after the show, please. First of all, welcome, Sally Yates, Alberto Gonzalez. Pleasure to have you. It feels to me like we have to start with what seems like a blockbuster Supreme Court ruling, the birthright citizenship case. And I just want to lay out as I understand why it's so significant and then hear from both of you your reactions. What it seems the court decided to do was to take this case and rule specifically on the procedural aspect of it, which is actually in some ways as important as the substantive one. The substantive issue was, can somebody born in this country be given a citizenship automatically? Is that a birthright because you were born in this country? The procedural issue is, can a district court judge issue an injunction, a kind of stay order, across the nation? And what the court said was no. You can only provide specific remedies for the person who sued. So if one family sued that the children were not being given citizenship in the United States, the district court can say that family can get remedy, and that those two kids, let's say, can get remedies, but it does not apply to any other similar children in similar cases. What strikes me, Sally, is nationwide injunctions have been, you tell me, but for decades and decades, I think, a very important part of the way courts limited executive power. Am I right? What do you think is going on here?
Yes, nationwide injunctions are nothing new. Now, to be honest, presidents have always hated them, whether you're a Democratic president or a Republican, because they are used as an effort to rein in actions of the executive. But nationwide injunctions also make sense. If you think about this, if a court has determined that the action of the executive is unconstitutional or unlawful, which is what the courts, all three courts to have considered this matter did, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it's only unconstitutional as to the particular litigants who brought this. So that's been sort of the basis for this. It's not that the district court opinion lives on forever. There is an appeal process after that to the circuit courts and ultimately to the Supreme Court to decide the substantive issue. But that nationwide injunctions are nothing new. Now, you can talk a little bit about Justice Barrett and her determination that they didn't exist back in the 1700s. And that was the reason why it was not going to be permitted today. But it's not a new thing.
Alberto, what is your reaction to that ruling?
Sally's right. All presidents, recent presidents, certainly have really chafed over the issue of nationwide injunctions. And I think for the layman, it does seem kind of weird that some district judge in Pecos, Texas, issues a ruling and binds the United States of America. So in that sense, to me, it seems a little weird, quite frankly. I think this decision does not affect the substantive issue of birthright citizenship, which I suspect we'll talk about. I think this was a way for the court to look at the issue presented, rule only on the issue. As a judge, I learned that you rule only on the issue before you get in, you get out. And I think that's what the court has done here. I think the bottom line is it really is going to enhance executive power. This current administration is really taking advantage of executive power. But honestly, we've had recent presidents, both Republican and Democrats, that have expanded or certainly expanded the use of executive power.
But I want to ask you, if I may, Alberto, what does strike me as what this ruling does is it disadvantages people who are in similar circumstances to the litigants, who may be poor, who can't afford a lawyer, who can't, it does feel like this has been part of the American system that you pick a person who has the capacity to litigate the issue, and that then is a stand-in for a lot of other people who can't protect themselves. Do you worry about that? Those people losing that right?
I worry about anyone losing access to the courts. I think we're probably going to see perhaps more class actions. People, if they qualify to be members of a class, yeah, I worry about access to our court system. There's no question about it. So, perhaps we'll need to have additional areas in which the local bar associations step up and provide some kind of assistance. So, again, this is, from my perspective, again, this is about eliminating something that, quite frankly, to me, has been somewhat strange. And I think that we are yet to see the full ramifications of this. I think this could get very messy. The court has invited a great deal of chaos, possibly. So we'll just have to see. It's just too early to tell as far as I'm concerned.
So the first piece of that chaos, Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, there are, 10 injunctions that have restrained the Trump administration on various issues, from canceling Harvard's international students to restoring funding for USAID because that was congressionally sanctioned. Do all those injunctions get swept away now? I assume the Trump administration will now claim that when it will bring new cases to court. Right?
Certainly, I don't think it happens automatically. The Trump administration will need to take action, but they've got a pretty good opinion to lean on there as it relates to nationwide injunctions. And, one of the things that I find most troubling, I understand everything that you're saying, Judge, but, the Supreme Court didn't have to take this case right now on the issue of nationwide injunctions. They could have waited until the case came up with the substantive issue of birthright citizenship. And at that point, if they felt strongly that nationwide injunctions didn't make any sense, they could issue that opinion, but do it at the same time that they ruled on what seems like such an obvious issue here. I mean, birthright citizenship is enshrined in our Constitution, but now we're in this netherworld where it may be that if you are the child of an undocumented immigrant born in one state, you're a citizen, but a child born in another state, you're not. That can't be in our country's interest.
So I want to ask you about the politics of this, because it does seem, as Sally Yates says, that the court leapt to take this case and decide on this injunction. When Biden was president, there were several nationwide injunctions against him on core issues of his agenda. The court never seemed to mind. In fact, in one case, as I recall, I think the student loan one, they reaffirmed the nationwide injunction. So they suddenly discover when a Republican president is in office that the presidency has much greater powers than they thought it did 3 years ago.
Let me give you a possible scenario, and I have no basis whatsoever to reach. It is possible that the court took this case to decide the substantive issue. And as they negotiate what the opinion should read, they discover they don't have 5 votes either way. And so as a result of that, they decide to punt the substantive issue and deal only with the nationwide injunction.
That means you think the court is deadlocked as to whether the 14th Amendment grants birthright citizenship?
Well,
it seems pretty obvious.
Well, it seems obvious to me. Yeah. I don't know if it's so obvious to Sally, but it seems pretty obvious to me. And I think that there are at least 5 votes to affirm that, and perhaps the only way to get this opinion out was to carve away the substantive issue and deal only with the nationwide injunction.
Let's talk
if we don't have 5 votes on this, we're all in really big trouble.
Let's talk about some of these other big cases that people have brought. It does seem to me like with some of these cases with the funding, Congress is clearly authorized to fund. The executive branch can't withhold those funds, or Harvard University, it does seem like Harvard is being punished for a free expression. Run through some of the ones that strike you as the most important or egregious, or...
Oh, gosh, where does one start? Judge, what?
Well, I'll start with law firms.
Yeah.
Going after those responsible for representing your interests, those responsible for protecting the rule of law, and to go after those firms and to have those firms capitulate, quite frankly, was so disappointing. So that, to me, is very, very dangerous. We need to be confident that particularly lawyers, we need to be confident that we can represent people in our courts, and people need to be confident that they will not have problem getting the best possible legal representation. So that to me, that is just one. But that I would start with the law firms.
Who's going to win, Harvard or Trump?
I hope that Harvard wins, which means we all win.
Yes.
But as a lawyer, do you think Harvard has a very strong case, or will it depend on, because it could go all the way to the Supreme Court?
It could. My firm is representing Harvard, so I kind of feel like I shouldn't be.
All right. Well,
okay, I'm not representing Harvard, but I went to Harvard, so I'm not going to talk about this.
If you were barred from deciding on that basis, as I recall, 7 of the 9 justices went to either Harvard or Yale, so we'd be in trouble. Let me ask.
Can I mention one quick executive order here? When I punted on the question before, this is one that may sound like it doesn't affect all of us, but it actually does, and that is the president's executive order directing the Department of Justice to investigate Chris Krebs, who was the cybersecurity officer who had said that the 2020 election was safe and secure and there was no interference here. The idea that the president, I know we're going to talk about this later, but that the president of the United States would issue an executive order directing DOJ to investigate someone, that is the rule of law blown up. And so it doesn't just affect Chris Krebs, it affects every single person in the United States.
So, Judge, I want to give you the chance to talk about what is behind this in a sense, because there are core members of the kind of Project 2025, and it's been true with some Federalist Society people, believe in something called the unitary executive, believe the executive should be much stronger. And I think specifically think that post-Watergate, the executive branch has been constrained, and that this is an effort to kind of unshackle the executive branch. Is that, do you think these are legitimate moves in that direction, or is it going too far in the way that Sally was describing?
I think that there are a group of individuals who I respect, who believe that the executive power of Article 2 is invested in the President of the United States. And it is the President of the United States who decides what the law is for the executive branch, not for the government, certainly not overruling the Supreme Court. But the President of the United States, traditionally, a traditional White House, you have 20,000 lawyers, roughly 20,000 lawyers that work within the executive branch. And, they advise the president. You have general counsels at agencies. You have the White House counsel. You have, of course, the Department of Justice has the responsibility charged by statute to provide legal advice to the president and to the other agencies. And that's the way it normally works. This administration has brought that legal decision-making into the White House. And honestly, I think you can do that under this theory. And so he surrounded himself with people that are loyalists. And so all the people that might oppose him and tell him no are gone. And again, but if you believe in the unitary theory, the President of the United States can decide what the law is for the executive branch. And he can tell the Solicitor General what the brief should say when it goes up to the Supreme Court.
So you sound like you're uncomfortable with a lot of the things going on, but you don't seem like you're agitated. Is it because you view this as a 2-alarm fire, or is it a 5-alarm fire?
Well, it's certainly very different than the president that I worked with and the Department of Justice that I led, and I know that Sally also worked in. And, it makes me uncomfortable. In the hands of a person with integrity, I have a lot less concern. The main concern I have is that I don't believe that Donald Trump has the integrity necessarily to effectively govern fairly this country.
But in a sense, that is the genius of the Constitution, right? Madison says if men were angels, no government would be necessary.
Absolutely.
Right? So we're planning for self-interested people and power-hungry people, and that's why the checks are so important.
But talking about checks, if I can just, Sally, say this. I'm most disappointed, well, maybe not most disappointed, equally disappointed in the Congress. Mm-hmm. They have the power over appointments, they have the power over funding, and they're doing nothing. Right. And so I don't understand it. When we worked in the White House, we respected, because we were forced to respect the authority of Congress. They would always tell us, this is our prerogative, you can't do this.
It is striking what Alberto says, that Congress, the administration seems to be deliberately flouting Congress. So, for example, when they fired the inspectors general, the law, which Congress had written, merely said that the president has to give 6 months' notice and a valid reason. The Trump administration almost defiantly fired them all instantly with no reason. And Congress didn't say anything. Didn't say, can you just at least follow the damn procedures, and 6 months later all these people will be gone. But it's almost as though, as I say, as a point, they're trying to make a point that post-Watergate, this executive branch has been shackled, and we are unshackling it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's almost defiantly. I think it was defiantly. And that seems to be the mode that this president has been operating in, particularly here in his second term, which is almost I dare you to do anything to try to check my power. And unfortunately, it seems like most everybody's cowering in that, whether it's Congress, as you were pointing out, or businesses or universities sometimes, or others. And so once you get that power of intimidation, you don't even have to tell people what to do anymore because they are obeying in advance. They know what you want, what he wants them to do, and they do it. So I think this is all part of a diabolically brilliant scheme to be able to concentrate power in the presidency. And I totally understand your point, Judge, about Article 2 vesting in the president, the power and the responsibility to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And so constitutionally, may the president tell the department what to do? Yes. But I would say the same thing that I used to say to brand new prosecutors who would come to our office, and that is, just because you can, that doesn't mean you should. And for over 50 years since Watergate, Republican and Democratic presidents alike and attorneys general alike have recognized that the rule of law requires that the White House, that the president not be reaching in to try to determine individual cases and prosecutions.
Judge, you said something very important earlier. You said that in the Bush administration, you were forced to respect Congress and congressional decisions. Well, the truth is the executive branch is not forced to do anything, right? In a weird way, it has to enforce the checks on its own power because Congress doesn't have an army or a police force. The court doesn't have an army or police force. And one of the critical things that people worry about is the Trump administration actually flouting court orders? Is it, in the case of Garcia, did they actually, or even with these funding cases, the court says restore the funding, and somehow you look at the USAID funding and it's 80% lower than it was. In other words, they found some other workaround which they claim it's for a different reason we're now not funding. Do you think that's happening, and how unprecedented is it? Did you guys ever do that in the Bush administration?
Well, I would never admit that if we did. I certainly don't recall an instance of doing that. What would happen in the Bush administration is that relationship between the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader and the President was very, very clear. And there was very, very candid discussion about what we will allow you to do and what we will not allow you to do. And so it's a question of respecting the authority of a co-equal branch of government. But it does start with the president. If the president doesn't share that respect, then it's not going to happen.
So in the Bush administration, as I recall, after 9/11, there were a number of efforts to expand presidential power.
No question.
And the courts several times ruled against you. How did Bush react to that?
Yeah, there were 4 cases: Hamdan, Hamdi, Boumediene, and Rasool. So the lawyers advised the President Bush what you can do in fighting an enemy that has attacked us. And so the lawyers collectively informed the president what authority he has to respond to this. And the court 4 times says, no, you don't have that authority. And when I would tell President Bush of the court's decision, he didn't go out and start slamming the court. What he would say is, that's what the courts are for. They're there to tell us whether or not we're doing the right thing, and if so, we continue forward. If not, then we change direction. That's the way we handled it.
So there was never ever any thought about
There was never any question about ignoring the decision of the court. And again, this is a wartime president talking about commander-in-chief authority to deal with an enemy that has attacked us. And the court says there are limits here. Justice O'Connor, in the case of Hamdi, had that famous statement, a state of war is not a blank check for the president when it comes to the rights of American citizens. And she's absolutely right.
So let's talk about this court, which seems to be ruling in very different ways. What is your sense of it? Has the Supreme Court essentially been transformed in the last 5 or 7 years?
Well, certainly I think it's been transformed in a lot of ways. As the judge was saying, I think it's a big proponent of the power of the executive, and we've seen that in the decisions. I think we should expect to see that going forward. But I'm an optimist, and I don't believe that they are going to give the executive unchecked authority. They didn't, for example, with respect to the decision in the election. And so I think there are going to be limits I'm just not sure what those limits are. And they're probably not going to be drawn where a lot of us would draw those lines.
You appointed two of them, but in the sense that your president appointed two of them.
I recommended two of them, yes.
I think two of them worked for you. So that's four out of this bunch.
Yeah, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh worked for me.
What do you think of this court?
I will tell you that with respect to three of them, and I'm not going to name names, but with respect to three, I have confidence that they are doing the right thing based upon for the right reasons. There's one that I'm a little disappointed in, quite frankly.
3 out of 9 is not a good number here, you know.
So, you know, I don't know. I've been on the court before, so I don't know the give and take that's going on with the other justices on these are very difficult issues. And you've got some very smart people on both sides. And so the give and take, without knowing what those are, and without having read the briefs, which I haven't on some of these cases, you know, it's hard. I find it difficult to second guess decisions, but just from, 1,000 feet, some of these decisions I find a little bit troubling.
Talk about, though, the tone. You may not have read the briefs, but we've all seen excerpts of the rulings, and the vitriol between Amy Coney Barrett, for example, and Justice Ketanji Brown is extraordinary. Justice Jackson. One says, Justice Jackson says the rule of law in America is over. And then Amy Coney Barrett says, I'm not even going to dignify this with a response. You just want an imperial judiciary. It doesn't sound like they get on. I mean, this is not very amicable.
Well, and I think maybe perhaps in hindsight, they're going to look back and think, maybe that went a little bit too far, quite frankly. And so these are very important points. Obviously, they feel very deeply about it. And one side was unsuccessful in persuading the other side as to their views. And so you have that kind of rhetoric sometimes. I don't like to see it. I think it hurts the court, quite honestly. Sometimes it seems like those words are meant for an audience. And I think the court needs to be very careful about this. It's about the court, not about individual justices. It's like when President Trump goes out and, by name, thanks the justices. You thank the court. Mm-hmm. I guess that gives them license when they do a bad job to criticize them by name. The point is, it's the Supreme Court, and I think you ought to try to keep as much personality as you can out of it, the decisions. Let's
talk a little about, there's so much you guys were involved in that one doesn't know where to start, but these prosecutors, Justice Department prosecutors, the way in which they have been compelling certain kinds of prosecution or U.S. attorneys to do certain things, with the Eric Adams case in New York. What do you think of all that? How unprecedented is it? Again, is this a 2-alarm fire or a 5-alarm fire? How should we think about this?
We may differ on this. I'm putting it at the 5-alarm fire level. I have never...
Explain why and what.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like this. This is a situation here where, you just named 2 examples where in the Eric Adams case where through the White House, they reached in to essentially strike a deal, according to the U.S. attorney in New York, that if Adams was going to support the president's actions with respect to immigration, that they would dismiss the criminal case. Think about that. You are trading a criminal prosecution for help in advancing your policy objectives. I don't understand how we're not all breathless about that. But the fact of the matter is these things are happening with such frequency, it's hard to stay in that constant state of outrage. Just yesterday, 2 more prosecutors were fired who had been career civil servants who were prosecutors on the January 6th insurrection cases. 2 more of those prosecutors fired for that. Not to mention firing all the prosecutors, again, career people who were part of Jack Smith's team. When I think that was done, was that day 1 or pretty darn close to day 1? That sends an incredible message to everybody out there in the Department of Justice. Look, you have public servants, career public servants there, they need their jobs. It is going to be really hard for them to get fired and then go out there and find another job. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to willingly go along with something that's improper, but the president's playing on that fear. And so this is creating exactly the kind of atmosphere that he wants for everybody at DOJ and the FBI to do exactly what he wants or else.
Let me just follow up with Sally's absolutely right. I think the firing of the prosecutors who did their job and prosecuted wrongdoing, those January 6 rioters, is a betrayal to fire them. Absolutely wrong. Mm-hmm. And then to top it off by pardoning the January 6 rioters, I mean, come on.
And wiping it off of the website, DOJ website, as if it never happened, as if these, and now they're the hostages, the January 6 hostages instead of defendants. It's very Orwellian in terms of rewriting history here on top of everything else.
Is there, Judge, again, a theory, unitary executive that explains, is this just pure self-interest? The Trump administration wants to get back at its enemies or get what it's done? Or is there a larger theory that says, look, the president should be able to run the entire executive branch down to line attorneys?
I think it gets back to what Sally said. He may have that authority, but I'm not sure it should be exercised all the time, and it shouldn't be exercised the way it has been exercised. I can't imagine, the atmosphere amongst the career folks at the department. They must be just demoralized, and they can't serve you. They can't do their job and go after criminals because they're petrified about losing their job. And that's just not right.
Fareed, I remember when I first was appointed U.S. Attorney, it was the beginning of the Obama administration. And all of us were invited to the White House for what was essentially a photo op with the president. And we dutifully lined up there in the East Room on the bleachers, and we're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited about, our new jobs. And President Obama walked in, and an aide had prepared remarks for him, that they handed to him, and he sort of looked at it and put them aside. And I'll never forget this. He leaned forward and looked at us and said, "I may have appointed you, but you don't work for me. You represent the people of the United States. And as long as you remember that, we're going to be good." Now, I say that not to deify President Obama, because again, as I mentioned before, that was the ethos of every single president in Republican and Democratic administrations since Watergate, when there was a recognition that regardless of what the Constitution and the law permit in terms of the president's authority over the Justice Department, that the rule of law will not survive. And so all sorts of things were put in place, and I'll quit rambling on about this. All sorts of things were put in place after that has been observed and honored by every single president until now.
Let's talk about one other element of all this, which is another piece of your sprawling empires that you guys ran, was the FBI. When you look at the way Kash Patel is running the FBI now, what are your thoughts?
I try not to think about it. I had Bob Mueller as the FBI director, and we had an instance where involving some documents that we had confiscated on Capitol Hill in connection with a search, and we got all kinds of political pressure from the Speaker Hastert, saying that search was unlawful. You invaded the prerogatives of the House. You need to return the documents. And I got a lot of pressure from people in the White House and others, members on the Hill, to return those documents. And I sat down with Bob Mueller and I said, "Bob, I'm getting pressure that we need to return the documents." And he kind of looked at me and said, "Well, I've got the documents. I'm not going to return the documents." He said, "I'll resign before I return the documents." He says, "This was a valid search in connection with a valid investigation." Well, as soon as Bob said that, I knew that I would have to resign if the president asked me to return the documents, because Bob was beloved in the department. And I was, I had been Bush's White House counsel. There were concerns that I was too close to President Bush. And I knew that I could not be effective as Attorney General if, in fact, the President asked me to return the documents, because Bob would resign. And I actually, at one point, went into the Oval Office with a resignation letter in my pocket that I was prepared to give President Bush if, in fact, he gave me the order to return the documents. Fortunately, he never did that.
Wow. What do you think, what happens with an FBI that's run the way it's... I mean, it also seems fairly chaotic. Apparently, he's still living in Las Vegas and using one of the FBI planes to go back and forth. I mean, it all seems a little unorthodox.
Yeah, I'm not so sure it's a bad thing for him to be out of town. I mean, so if you've got the career people at the Bureau then running the place, I'm kind of okay with that.
What the G6, get him a NetJets contract and he can do that forever.
Yeah. But no, I mean, look, I was with DOJ for almost 30 years and worked, with the FBI all of that time. And it sounds trite to say, but it is an amazing organization of dedicated professionals that need to be able to conduct the investigations, as you just said, Judge, and based on the facts and the law and nothing else. And it is not an arm to be used to settle scores or advance partisan agendas or to go after enemies. And what you need is a director like Bob Mueller there who protects the Bureau from any of that, not someone who facilitates it.
Let's talk a little bit about this kind of war on the permanent state, on these bureaucrats, on these civil servants, because both of you have spent a lot of time in this world, and Alberto, you're a Republican. There does seem to be this rage that Trump has tapped into against the bureaucracy, permanent government. There's this sort of idea that they're all terrible and corrupt and liberal, and we've got there's almost a cultural revolution element to bringing them down. What do you think that's about?
I think we would all agree that probably our government is a little bit too big, and that we do have waste, quite honestly. We do have unnecessary spending, but they also do tremendous work and service for all of us. And what I worry about is we are losing some great experience within these agencies because people are scared or they're at least discouraged, and so we lose that experience. And I don't know whether or not this is something that Trump really cares about, or whether it's something his subordinates think it's a big deal. It'd be kind of cool to get rid of some of these bureaucrats. So I don't know whether or not this is something that is significant importance to President Trump, but obviously it's part of the Project 2025, and they aim to carry it out. But I do think that, again, some changes probably would be appropriate, but we're losing a lot of good people, a lot of good experience.
What do you think of this? Because there is this rage. I mean, even when they do it, there's a sort of cruelty with which...
Like glee, right?
Yeah. Like, I was struck with the USAID people, and I know, just because I've traveled, I've met these people. I mean, these are extraordinary people. These are people who decide to spend their lives working in God-forsaken places in rural Ghana, Nigeria, working on water filtration and nutrition for not a lot of money. They're raising their families in those circumstances. And fine, you want to cut the funding. But to then call them criminals and, this is a criminal enterprise. I mean, it strikes me as there's some kind of fervor out there that's a little bit strange to understand.
It is, when this all started with Doge, and exactly you're right, that public servants were being vilified. I thought, I think part of it is some of the folks who are doing this, they just can't wrap their head around the idea that there are people who are truly dedicated to public service. I mean, it seems like, President Trump might consider them suckers and losers who are willing to take jobs, not just willing, but embrace taking jobs where you make less money, but you are actually contributing to the public good. And so absolutely, I agree with you, Judge. Could every federal agency out there probably benefit from a hard look internally, internally at how it can be more efficient? Absolutely. But this vilification of public servants, I think is going to have an impact on our country for years and years to come, because it is turning off the pipeline of young people wanting to come into public service. I mean, in the past, we have always respected public servants, and it has drawn people from all across the political spectrum to want to serve their country. It's kind of hard to imagine who really wants to raise their hand right now when you're either going to be called stupid or corrupt or lazy. I mean, that's sort of how they've all been labeled, and that's just not right.
So I got to ask you, what are you thinking about all of this as a Republican? What do you think of where your party is right now?
I'm not sure that what we are seeing today, look, I still consider myself a Republican. I consider myself a Bush Republican. No way am I a Trump Republican. These things do go in cycles.
But hasn't he essentially taken over the party? There are not a lot of you Bush Republicans left.
For now, he has. There's no question about it. And, you know, here's the thing. I think that Ideas, the name of this conference, is especially appropriate because America is an idea. It's an idea that changes from time to time depending on its leadership and its people. And so right now we're going through a tough time, but we've gone through tough times before, as we all know. And we've always got through it. And so I'm optimistic by nature that will happen again. I'm asked all the time, well, how? How will it happen again? I don't know that I have the answer, but you think about the brain power that's in this room and all across this campus, and you multiply it, you know, by 1,000 or whatever, all across this country, and we can make a difference. We have to remember that part of the reason we have a problem in Congress is because we put the people in Congress, the American people. We have some responsibility. We can make a change there, okay? Once we make a change here, we can make progress. And so it's going to be a hard project, no question about it, but I have confidence that the Republican Party will once again turn back. And it's true that I think both parties, once you assume power, you abuse power. Power is intoxicating. I've seen it. And that's why integrity, particularly in the presidency, is so vitally important.
Yeah, I mean, and as you say, power is intoxicating. I mean, it feels like, I remember Thomas Paine was asked after the revolution, what is the difference between America and England? And he said, in America, the law is the king. And there's always been that feeling that this is what distinguishes this country. But when you look at the Department of Justice and the Attorney General, this is an area where the U.S. is now a little bit of an outlier compared to other Western democracies. Where in other Western democracies over the last 30 or 40 years, the Departments of Justice have essentially become independent agencies that do not report directly to the head of state or head of government. Whereas in America, because it's the oldest constitution in the world, we have a very old structure where, you know, and where the Attorney General is directly answerable to the president. And it's taken tradition and norm to make it move away from that. And, you know, it's only been recent that JFK appointed his brother Attorney General. Do you worry that norm has now been collapsed? Because Trump essentially treats the Attorney General as his personal lawyer, right?
Well, he's certainly trying to collapse the norm. And through his actions, he is not respecting the norm at all. I mean, there used to be, and they've even just sort of done it in black and white. After Watergate, there was a White House contacts policy, a memo that was done by the White House counsel to try to put some parameters around this to say that the president and the vice president can only contact the Department of Justice through the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General or head of the Office of Legal Counsel. And the understanding was it was only on matters of policy in terms of like what types of prosecutions, not individual cases. Well, some iteration of that memo has been promulgated by every single president and White House counsel and Attorney General since then. Well, they've got a memo now, but that memo is dramatically different. It specifically authorizes the president and vice president to reach out to the Department of Justice about specific cases and investigations. I mean, people used to say they're saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, it's right there in black and white. So that's a norm that has been totally busted. What I'm hopeful about, and I know with the swirl of everything that's going on in the country right now, it's really hard to focus on things that don't feel like they're necessarily directly impacting your day-to-day life. But this does impact our day-to-day lives, because whether it's an investigation of a president or another individual, or the next day it can be you or your family or your friends who were targeted in a way that this country has before now not allowed. We have to stay focused on this. I get asked too, like, what can we do? I also don't have the great answer, but our elected representatives need to know that these issues matter to us. If there's anything President Trump responds to, it's public opinion. He likes being popular. We need to make this unpopular.
Another piece that is politicized, and I think this is bipartisan, is the use of the presidential pardon power, which I personally wish was not in the Constitution. I think it's a crazy idea that in this, this constitutional republic with all this respect for law, suddenly the president on this one issue is like the king and can just summarily and arbitrarily pardon people. Biden has did it to his family. I am guessing at the end of the Trump administration, he will pardon all of his family.
There'll be scores of pardons at the end.
So is there any way now to put Humpty Dumpty back together and go back to at least what had been the tradition, that these things were used in limited forms and that the presidents were careful about how often they pardoned how many people?
Well, in the past, most of the controversial pardons would have occurred at the very end of the administration because they wouldn't want to incur the criticism of pardoning a relative, for example. Obviously, that has changed. In terms of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, the pardon power is virtually unlimited. It's limited to federal cases, basically. I think you could make an argument the president could pardon himself, and I anticipate that President Trump will do that at the end of his administration. Now, some scholars and lawyers disagree about that.
You think he will pardon himself?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Why wouldn't he? Now, he may say, well, I don't need to because I've done nothing wrong. So maybe that will prevent that from happening. But if I were advising him, I would say, pardon yourself.
Just in case.
Now, as I said, I feel like this is bipartisan because I do think that there was a kind of extraordinary rush to use the law against Trump. And in any individual case, it might have been justified, but certainly the public's reaction to it was, this seems like, he's just being slammed by everybody, every member of his family, the hundreds of subpoenas. I have no doubt it helped him politically. And if you look at the poll numbers, you can see that, because people forget, right? After January 6th, he was way down in the polls. DeSantis was leading by 20 or 30 points in matchups, and then he starts to get indicted, and you start to see his numbers. Was it a mistake? Forget about the politics of it. Was it a because prosecutors do have discretion. Should they have brought all these cases, some of which seemed pretty minor, some of them seem very old?
Yeah, I think you're right about the combined effect of both the federal cases, the state cases, the civil cases. It allowed him to, cast himself as a victim here, which I'm still having a hard time swallowing, but as a victim on this. But the fact of the matter is, Fareed, it's not like the federal prosecutors are coordinating and strategizing with the New York state prosecutors who are coordinating and strategizing with civil prosecutors. That if you're at the Department of Justice and you're looking at what the rule of law is, and there are two components to it, one being you don't use the power of the state to go after your enemies. You don't use it for personal reasons or to protect yourself or your friends. But the other side of the coin is what you just mentioned a minute ago, is that there's one set of laws and they apply equally to everyone. So your responsibility then is to enforce that law. Now, you try to do it in a way that engenders the trust of the public. So I would agree with you that sort of the piling on thing strategically was not a good idea.
Like the New York case seemed pretty bizarre, the way it was turned into a federal a crime, by a felony, by, it was a sleight of hand. It was very tough to get to a federal crime.
Yeah. All of that being said,
well, I was just going to say, the department would have a lot less control over the state cases. And with respect to the federal cases, I think Merrick Garland waited as long as he could, and even appointed a special prosecutor. And now that department is criticized because they waited so long.
Right.
But he waited because he was afraid that by rushing out, it would be viewed as political.
But sometimes you just have to do the right thing, even if you're going to be accused of being political. Yeah. That's not a criticism of Merrick Garland here. I'm just saying, I was a public corruption prosecutor for 20 years before becoming U.S. attorney. And granted, we weren't prosecuting the president, but local officials, state officials, those can be pretty intense things as well. And every time you bring that, you're going to be accused of some improper ulterior motive. You got to make sure you don't have that motive and that you've done the investigation the right way, and then you got to pull the trigger and bring the case that needs to be brought.
Any thoughts on this?
No, I agree with Sally completely.
You've talked a lot and you've written about leadership. Do you think is it possible with an administration that's this, powerful and directed, could individual lawyers working for the government assert their independence? Some of them have resigned in the New York case.
Well, of course you can try, but if the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, or head of the Civil Division says, no, we're not going to do that, then you have a choice. You go forward with what they want, or you resign. I think as long as you have the leadership taking certain positions under the direction of the president, there are limits to what the career folks can do.
All right, we have a few minutes, so I'm going to ask you both to end on an optimistic note. What makes you feel optimistic about the current situation of the state of law in the United States? Sally, I started with you, so I'll start with you and then end with Alberto.
I have been a bit of a Debbie Downer. I get it sort of during this, but I am optimistic. I mentioned that I was worried about turning off the faucet of public service, but I have the opportunity to work with young lawyers who come into our firm, or also to interact with new young AUSAs in the Department of Justice. And let me tell you, these folks are very idealistic. They believe in our system of justice. They want to make a difference. They care about fairness and justice. And I am optimistic because I have not seen them get cynical yet. And as long as we can protect that, democracy has a future.
We live in the greatest country in the face of the earth, still. I tell my law students at Belmont, first of all, pay attention. Understand that as a lawyer, you're going to have a grave responsibility to lead this country. And so when I spend a lot of time with young people, I sometimes go and speak at the service academies, and they're unbelievable, these young people who have committed themselves to fight for freedom, not just here in this country, but around the world. So I'm very optimistic, but we have to pay attention, folks, and we have to do what we can within our little circle. I understand that we may feel like I really can't do anything. I really can't influence anything. But you can within your small circle. Some people have bigger circles than others, and we can make a difference.
Alberto Gonzalez, Sally Yates, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.